Welcome to Local Edition on Time Warner Cable. I'm Steve Swatt with an expanded Sacramento report. You may have heard about legislation at the state capitol to exempt the feminine hygiene products from the state sales tax. Well, my guest this segment is Cristina Garcia from Bell Gardens, who is the author of that legislation. She's also the vice chair of the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So this issue is getting a lot of ink throughout the state of California, actually nationally. Give us your rationale for introducing this piece of legislation.
You know, I think for me it was having a discussion with women back home in my district about the day-to-day necessities and the stress to pay for that. And so we started to think about what is that? And so that includes things like tampons and pads for our periods. And if you are low income, coming up with $7 a month can be a problem. And so we started to think about how do we make that more affordable. And we started to talk about, is it a luxury or is this a necessity? And the more I dig into it, I thought, you know, really, this is a tax on being a woman because it's the only thing I have found that we get taxed. I don't have any similar comparisons that men deal with, and it's not a luxury, and it's not something we could just ignore every month. And so I felt that there's an equity issue there in our tax code, and we needed to fix that. And then secondly, we need to figure out how to make these more affordable for low-income women. And then thirdly, how do we get them into hands of low-income women if they can't afford them?
There's a larger issue here, a couple of larger issues here. One is the idea of gender equity, which is, really goes to the heart of this legislation.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that people have been comparing is saying if this is in the health arena, we have other health products that are taxed, and hearing aids, for example, have come up. So I think we do have to discuss our tax code and what's a necessity and what do we tax. But I think, secondly, what happens is a lot of these medical health items are covered through insurance. So even if they're taxed, there's a way for you to get them for free because we're giving you access to it through a program. But we don't have access to these products through a program. And it's something that only affects women. Only women deal with it. And it's something that does take a toll. And when we think about it, it does take a biological, process, and it is a health issue.
Are there other issues you think that women deal with that need to be addressed in the tax code?
I think there might be, out there. But, for example, people have brought up diapers and toilet paper, and I think we definitely need to look at that also. Those are real necessities also. But those affect families, both male and females, and that's not the case with these feminine products. This is something that's specific to women who already have enough barriers and a pay gap that we're dealing with.
Is there also a larger question here that maybe our tax code needs a top-to-bottom scrutiny to see, what are necessities, basic necessities that need to be included?
Yeah. I think a lot of us want to have that discussion. And my joint co-author, Ling Ling Chang, this is a bipartisan effort, and we now have male co-authors on here also, are looking at that reality also. But and so I think we want to have that discussion at large, and I want to be a part of that discussion. But for me, something where it's specific to one gender only and we have an inequity, something that needs to be corrected now.
What do you think the legislature as a whole is on this? Because I know the other measure that you mentioned, the diaper tax exemption, has been sort of stuck in the Assembly.
It has been stuck in the Assembly, and it'll be up in appropriations in the near future. It's changed along the way. I want to say that this bill helps both this issue and that issue move forward. And so we've been getting positive feedback. I think the initial thing is getting through that novelty. We've also been taught not to talk about this. So there's a little bit of a shock factor at first, or why are we discussing this, or just a lot of discomfort. So I think once we get through that piece, I want to think that my colleagues will be on board. And next is how do we get the governor on board? The reality is that we pay $20 million a year in taxes for these products. And so that's still a loss to the general fund. Where are we going to make that up? Or, are we in the business of taxing a part of the population just for being a woman?
We should say before we segue to another subject that the bill has just been introduced as we tape this interview. You haven't even had your first hearing in the Assembly yet.
No, it won't be heard until sometime in April probably. But in the meantime, we're working on co-authors. We have about 15 co-authors, male, female, and it's bicameral and bipartisan.
Let's talk about another issue that is rapidly becoming front and center, and I know you had some legislation signed by the governor on this regarding e-cigarettes or vaping, and your bill that the governor signed bans sales to anyone under 18.
Yeah.
Right.
So before this bill, a minor could buy everything related to an e-cigarette, to the vaping device, the liquids, but they couldn't purchase the nicotine. Oftentimes this became a gateway, and the kids would find a way to find that nicotine also. And so we closed that loophole. If you're a minor, you can't buy anything associated with e-cigarettes now, and that got signed. there's penalties for selling this, like there is selling cigarettes or alcohol to minors out there right now. But really in this area, we have a lot of work to do, not just for minors, but for all of our consumers. There's no regulation. Some of these people are doing these juices, are creating them in their bathtubs, and so we don't know how healthy that is or how clean that is. Some of these products are coming from other countries, and we don't know what kind of chemicals are in them out there. And so working this year on new legislation to continue to regulate this and make sure that consumers know what the risks are and what they're putting into their bodies out there. And so we're looking at on regulation and maybe one day even taxing this product.
The industry, the e-cigarette industry, says it's less harmful to vape than it is to actually smoke cigarettes, and that vaping or e-cigarettes help individuals kick the habit of smoking. What would be your response to that?
I think we could go out there and find individuals who have used it that way, and we find individuals who have replaced one product with another product. For me, it's not about telling an individual you can't or can do this. If you're an adult, I kind of feel you need to make those decisions. But I want to make sure you're making informed decisions, and making it less harmful doesn't mean it's not harmful.
And there has been a significant amount of new research talking about the harmful effects of vaping
so
or
it
e-cigarettes.
doesn't mean it's less harmful. So for me, it's how do I make sure consumers are making educated choices? And yes, I also want to make sure that if it's something this is really bad for us and it's going to increase our health costs and we're all paying for that together, then, what do we do to try to make sure that people aren't using these products? I think that's the next discussion. But we're trying to stay, the course here of protecting the consumers so they at a minimum know exactly what they're consuming and there's safety regulations there.
And to further stigmatize the industry, we're seeing a bunch of new bills on e-cigarettes also.
Yeah, I think for myself, I'm not trying to stigmatize anybody. I actually want to have the industry at the table. I want to have the Heart Association at the table, the Cancer Association at the table, and try to figure out how we're going to move this discussion forward along the way. I think, if there's a health risk, we need to know about that.
I want to talk about another subject which I know is near and dear to your heart. You have a program, I guess it's in your district really, called There Ought to Be a Law, which is fascinating because you let your constituents sort of vie to propose legislation. So tell us a little bit about that and how that's working out.
So actually, I like to say that my constituents are my partners, and I'm only as good as the investment they put into my legislature and my work in the district. So I do a lot to engage them and to bring them in and help them also learn the realities of what my job is. So we've been sponsoring There Ought to Be a Law. We at least one of my legislation every year will come from the district. We get submittals, we then vet them, we try to figure out what are the odds, then we pick a winner, and the winner gets to come up and testify, gets to follow the process. Last year, our winners were a 5th grade class of elementary students who wanted to learn about the Mexican repatriation in their history textbooks. In the 1930s, there was an executive order to deport anyone of Mexican descent. And they would go to hospitals, to schools, to bus stops, and they would round you up and take you across. And so over 1 million Americans were illegally deported. And so these kids wanted to learn about that history. They wanted to make sure other children were learning about that history and that we're not doing those mistakes. So that is now signed into law. That is now part of the curriculum contents that had just been updated by our Secretary of Education. And so it's exciting to have a 5th grade class showing people that it doesn't matter your age, if you're able to vote or not, but you could be an active part of our democracy.
Cristina Garcia, thank you very much for coming by.